March 23rd, 10:47 in the morning. Aldrich Pemberton sat in his command aircraft, 70 years old, shoulders squared against the cold metal seat. The C-47's engines droned steady through German airspace. Through the porthole window, the landscape below told a story of collapse. Smoke rising from 1,000 fires. Rivers cutting silver through devastation. Roads clogged with refugees and retreating Wehrmacht. Minutes from landing. Pemberton's hands rested on his knees. Still. Controlled. The way a man learns to hold himself when the world is watching. When history is taking notes. When every decision echoes through decades. He'd been awake since 4 that morning. Shaved carefully despite the early hour. Uniform pressed with military precision. Every crease sharp enough to draw blood. Today wasn't just another day in the European theater. Today was vindication. Today, Reginald Ashford would cross the Rhine. Operation Thunderclap. 2 months in planning. The most meticulously prepared river crossing since Normandy. Perhaps since Alexander crossed the Hellespont. Pemberton had personally approved every detail, signed off on every contingency, invited war correspondents from every major publication, arranged for photographers from Life and Time and Signal Corps. He'd even written the communique himself, the one celebrating American military excellence that would go out the moment Ashford's First Army secured the eastern bank. Everything was ready. The radio operator sat forward. Young corporal, maybe 22, face still soft with baby fat despite 2 years of war. Wisconsin accent, farm boy who'd probably never seen an ocean before shipping out. He pressed the headset tighter against his ear, listened. Then his face changed. Pemberton saw it. That flicker. The way color drains when news arrives that shouldn't exist. The operator turned, pale, eyes wide. 4 words. Merrick crossed last night. The engine's drone suddenly deafening in the silence. The aircraft seemed to lurch through it, flew steady. Pemberton's heart stopped. Actually stopped. He felt it, that suspension, that void between beats where the world tilts and nothing makes sense. Not today, Mo. Not with Ashford's 1,000 guns positioned along the river. Not with the airborne divisions warming engines on English airfields. Not with 3,000 artillery pieces ready to thunder at dawn. Not with photographers and correspondents and the weight of American military prestige hanging on this moment. Last night, with what boats, rafts, some improvised nightmare of American audacity, the operator was still talking, mouth moving, words coming out, but Pemberton couldn't hear them over the roar in his ears, the blood pounding, the implications cascading through his mind like artillery shells walking toward target. Declan Merrick. Of course it was Declan Merrick. The operator handed over the typed message. Pemberton's hands steady through Normandy, steady through the Bulge, steady through every crisis of this endless war, trembled as he took it. Flash traffic, eyes only. Third Army crossed Rhine Oppenheim, 22:37 hours. 22 March, 12,000 effectives. Assault boats, casualties minimal. Bridgehead secured. Merrick sends regards, regards. The bastard sent regards. Pemberton read it 3 times. Each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Something that didn't destroy months of planning. Something that didn't make a mockery of everything he'd promised. The aircraft commander appeared at his shoulder. Major Kendrick, young officer, West Point, too eager to please. Sir, we're on final approach. Secretary Pemberton. Pemberton looked up, managed a nod. Is there a problem, sir? A problem. Yes, you could call it a problem. You could call it a catastrophe. You could call it the moment when American military doctrine split into 2 warring factions, and Aldrich Pemberton found himself standing at the crossroads with no map and no guidance, and the entire future of warfare hanging on what he decided in the next few hours. No problem, Major. Proceed as planned. The aircraft banked, beginning descent. Below, Pemberton could see the staging area for Operation Thunderclap. Vehicles stretched to the horizon, artillery pieces parked in perfect rows. Tens of thousands of soldiers waiting for dawn tomorrow, waiting for the signal, waiting for their carefully orchestrated moment of glory. All of it now rendered ceremonial. A parade instead of an invasion. Theater instead of war. Merrick had already done it. His intelligence officer approached. Colonel Marcus Whitfield, 53 years old, career intelligence analyst. Man who'd spent 30 years reading between lines and understanding what wasn't said. Sir, there's something else you need to see. Came through from G2 just before we took off. He handed over a classified folder. Red stripe across the top. Intelligence analysis, compartmented. Pemberton opened it. Read. His face went still. German 159th Division at Oppenheim. Intelligence intercepts from February 28th. 3 weeks ago, the German forces had been withdrawing, thinning their positions, creating a gap in their defensive line. The window had been open, the opportunity clear. Was this shared with First Army? Yes, sir. General Ashford's G2 received it on March 1st. Full distribution according to protocol. March 1st, 3 weeks before Operation Thunderclap was scheduled. 3 weeks when Ashford could have accelerated, could have seized the opportunity, could have adjusted his careful timeline to exploit enemy weakness. But he'd stuck to his plan, his meticulous preparation, his overwhelming force doctrine. And Merrick had seen the same intelligence enacted. Pemberton closed the folder carefully. Mind racing, the calculation shifting. This wasn't just about insubordination anymore. This was about two different ways of reading the same battlefield, two different decisions about the same opportunity. Ashford had chosen to stick with overwhelming preparation. Merrick had chosen to strike while the window was open. Who was right? Who was wrong? Or was that even the question? The aircraft touched down, gentle, professional. The pilot knew he was carrying the Secretary of War. No dramatic approach, no showing off. Through the window, Pemberton could see the reception committee, Ashford standing ramrod straight, staff officers arrayed behind him like an honor guard, correspondents with notepads, photographers with bulky cameras, everyone waiting to witness glory, everyone about to witness something else entirely. To understand what Pemberton faced in that moment, you have to understand what he'd promised, what he'd guaranteed, what he'd staked his reputation on. 2 months earlier, different war, different world. Pemberton had sat across from Reginald Ashford in a requisitioned chateau in France. 18th century estate somehow still intact. Maps spread across mahogany that had witnessed 3 centuries of European history. Crystal chandelier catching winter light. Coffee in china cups. Real china. Real coffee luxuries that felt obscene with men dying 20 miles away. Ashford had just finished briefing him on Operation Thunderclap. Reginald Ashford, 55 years old, every inch the professional soldier. West Point class of 1912, had gone on to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, could quote Clausewitz in German and Napoleon in French. A man in the prime of his career who believed war was mathematics, variables and contingencies and probabilities. He'd presented 63 slides. Color-coded overlays, contingency plans for contingencies, weather delays, equipment failures, German counterattacks, even civilian evacuation routes in case of flooding. The man had thought of everything. Pemberton had been awed, more than impressed. This was brilliance. This was what separated professional armies from barbarian hordes. Reginald, Pemberton had said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. This will be the centerpiece of Allied victory in Europe. Ashford had allowed himself a small smile. The man never smiled broadly. Emotions kept under iron control. That was the academy way. That was professionalism. Not American improvisation, Pemberton had continued. American professionalism. This will show the world what our military is capable of when we do things the right way, when we apply superior planning and overwhelming force. I appreciate your confidence, Secretary. You have more than my confidence. You have my full support, whatever you need, however long it takes. We do this correctly. We do this in a way that sets the standard for American military operations for the next 50 years. Ashford had nodded once, sharp, precise. 2 months. I'll need 2 months to position forces, establish supply lines coordinate with air support. You'll have them. And Ashford had set to work, building his masterpiece, assembling his symphony of destruction. 1.2 million men, 25,000 vehicles, 3,500 artillery pieces, amphibious vehicles, pontoon bridges, smoke generator units, air support coordinated down to the minute, medical facilities pre-positioned with surgical teams and blood supplies. Supply dumps calculated to the last gallon of fuel, the last round of ammunition, the last can of rations. Ashford had even arranged for the 8th Army Band to play at the crossing ceremony. For 2 months, Pemberton had watched it take shape, had marveled at the precision, had taken quiet satisfaction in knowing that when this operation launched, it would prove once and for all that American forces could match, could exceed the legendary planning of any military in history. He'd told everyone, Joint Chiefs of Staff, President Roosevelt in a private meeting at the White House. Hell, he'd hinted at it in a radio address that reached millions. Soon he'd said into the microphone, the world will witness American military excellence on a scale never before seen. Our forces, led by brilliant commanders and supported by superior planning, will demonstrate that democracy produces not just free men, but the finest military the world has ever known. The communique was already written, sitting in his briefcase, ready to be released the moment Ashford's lead elements touched the eastern bank. Now it was Ash. The crew chief opened the door. Cold German air rushed in. March in Germany. Still winter's bite despite spring on the calendar. Smell of smoke and cordite and something else. The smell of a civilization collapsing. Pemberton stood, adjusted his coat, took a breath. Showtime. He descended the stairs with measured steps. Not too fast, that would show agitation. Not too slow, that would show reluctance. The perfect pace of a man in control. A man who knew exactly what he was doing, even when he didn't. Ashford saluted. Perfect form, arm rigid, eyes forward, face carved from New England granite. Mr. Secretary, welcome to Germany. Thank you for coming to witness Operation Thunderclap. The words hung there, innocent, expectant, professional. Pemberton returned the salute. General Ashford, I received your message. Walk with me. Not a request. An order. Quiet but unmistakable. Ashford's face registered nothing. Too disciplined for that. 33 years of military service had taught him perfect control. But his eyes flickered. Just once. Recognition that something was wrong. They moved away from the assembled staff. Away from the correspondence and the cameras and the machinery of public relations. Out toward the perimeter where the noise of preparation provided cover for difficult conversations. Behind them, the stage remained set for a triumph that would never happen. 3 men. That's what this story is really about. 3 men in the different wars they were fighting inside the same war. Aldrich Pemberton, 70 years old. Too old for this war, but too necessary to retire. Career diplomat who'd found himself thrust into military leadership by circumstance and President Roosevelt's confidence. A man who believed in process, in coalition building, in the careful orchestration of competing interests toward common goals. He'd built his reputation on that, on being the steady hand, the voice of reason, the man who could balance British demands against American capabilities, who could manage egos and ambitions and national pride while keeping the Allied war machine grinding toward Berlin. Pemberton represented the old way, the belief that wars were won through superior logistics, through careful planning, through the methodical application of overwhelming force. He'd lived through the Great War, seen what happened when generals threw men at barbed wire with more enthusiasm than sense, witnessed the butchery of the Somme, the waste of Passchendaele. He'd vowed then if he ever had power, if he ever had influence, he'd never let American boys die that way. Never let them be led by incompetent commanders who valued dash over preparation, glory over lives. So he'd championed Ashford. Because Ashford was careful, Ashford planned, Ashford calculated odds and minimized risks and brought his men home alive. Reginald Ashford, 55 years old, at the peak of his career, at the height of his powers. Everything he'd worked for his entire life culminating in this moment. This operation, this proof that his methods worked. West Point graduate who'd gone on to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. Academic excellence married to military discipline. A man who could quote Sun Tzu and Jomini and Clausewitz from memory, who studied campaigns the way priests study scripture, who believed that war at its essence was a problem to be solved through superior analysis. Ashford represented the East Coast military establishment, the academy-trained officer corps, the men who believed that America's strength lay not in individual heroics, but in its ability to mobilize vast resources and apply them with scientific precision, minimal casualties, maximum effect, victory through superior planning and overwhelming force. Never commit until you're certain of success. Never gamble with lives when calculation could guarantee outcomes. His men loved him for it, trusted him, knew that when Ashford said advance, it meant he'd done the math, checked the flanks, secured the supply lines, verified the intelligence. Their general wouldn't ask them to die for nothing. Conservative, yes, slow, perhaps, but alive. That was the promise Ashford made and kept. Follow my methods, trust my planning, and you'll go home to your families. And then there was Declan Merrick, 48 years old, California-born, youngest of the 3, young enough to be Ashford's son, young enough to adapt, young enough to see the war differently. Virginia Military Institute graduate, VMI, not West Point, and he'd never let anyone forget the distinction. VMI produced fighters, he'd say. West Point produced planners. Both necessary, both proud. both convinced their way was right. Olympic equestrian before the war, had represented America in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, stood on that podium and saluted the flag while Hitler watched, remembered thinking, "We'll be back." Next time, not for games, cavalry officer who'd adapted to mechanized warfare the way a natural athlete adapts to any sport. Understood instinctively that tanks were just steel horses, that armor warfare was cavalry warfare at higher speeds, that the principles didn't change mobility, shock exploitation. Only the tools. Merrick believed war was instinct, momentum, the art of seeing opportunity and seizing it before it vanished like smoke. You couldn't plan for opportunity. You could only be ready to exploit it when it appeared. He represented the mavericks, the field-promoted officers, the men who'd earned their stars not in seminar rooms, but in the killing fields of North Africa and Sicily and France, who'd learned their trade not from textbooks, but from surviving mistakes and adapting faster than the enemy. Speed over preparation, audacity over caution, results over protocol, initiative over coordination. Merrick's Third Army had become legendary. Not for careful planning, but for devastating speed. They'd relieved Bastogne in 72 hours when everyone said it would take a week. They'd raced across France so fast German commanders couldn't establish defensive lines. They fought with fury that seemed almost personal. Like Merrick was settling old scores. Like Berlin itself had insulted his mother. Publicly, Merrick wore ivory-handled pistols, polished boots that caught the sun, 3 stars gleaming on his helmet, the image of the warrior general, the kind of commander soldiers would follow into hell because hell would take one look at Merrick and step aside. Privately, he was different, quieter, thoughtful, spent evenings reading history and poetry, wrote letters to the families of every man killed under his command, handwritten, personal, never formed letters, never delegated 243 letters so far. He remembered every name, but on the battlefield, Merrick was pure predator. He understood something fundamental that academy training sometimes obscured. In war, the side that moves fastest wins, not because speed is inherently superior to planning, but because speed disrupts. Speed creates chaos. And in chaos, the advantage goes to whoever can adapt quickest. Ashford planned, Merrick adapted, and Pemberton had to choose between them. They walked in silence for 40 yards, long enough to leave the others behind, long enough for privacy, long enough for the weight of the moment to settle. Finally, Ashford spoke, voice tight, controlled, the way glass sounds right before it shatters. "Mr. Secretary, I must insist that General Merrick be relieved of command immediately." Direct, no preamble, no social pleasantries. That was Ashford's way. State the problem, propose the solution, execute efficiently. Pemberton kept walking, eyes forward, watching the Rhine in the distance, the river that had stopped armies for 1,000 years, the river Merrick had crossed in one night. "Tell me what happened." At approximately 22:37 hours last night, Third Army forces conducted an unauthorized crossing of the Rhine River at Oppenheim. 12,000 men, assault boats, no air support, no artillery preparation, no coordination with adjacent units, no notification to Supreme Headquarters until after the operation was complete. Casualties. Ashford's jaw tightened, just slightly. Under 30 killed, perhaps 60 wounded, final numbers still being compiled. 30 casualties to cross the Rhine, 30 men to breach Hitler's last natural barrier. The number was so low it was almost insulting. Almost mockery of every careful calculation about what river crossings cost. Bridgehead status. Secured as of 0600 this morning, Third Army has elements 5 miles inland. Forward reconnaissance reports minimal German resistance. They're advancing as we speak. They reached the edge of the encampment. Beyond the Rhine flowed dark and cold, 200 yards wide, fast current, steep banks, every military engineer's nightmare. Somewhere 20 miles south, Merrick's men were already pushing east, moving, exploiting, doing what Merrick did best. Pemberton stopped, turned to face Ashford directly. "Reginald, I need you to answer one question with complete honesty." "Always, sir." "If Merrick had asked permission to cross at Oppenheim last night, what would you have said?" Ashford didn't hesitate. "I would have denied it." "Why, quoi?" "His crossing diverts attention and resources from the main effort, from Operation Thunderclap, from the coordinated offensive that took 2 months to prepare. His action undermines theater planning and creates coordination problems across the entire front. The main effort, your main effort, the Allied main effort, Mr. Secretary, as agreed upon by theater planners, as approved by Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, as coordinated with British forces and air support elements. Pemberton nodded slowly. Planners who gave you 2 months and gave Merrick nothing. Sir, with respect. Reginald. Pemberton used his first name deliberately. Creating intimacy, forcing connection. Is this about strategy or pride? Color rose in Ashford's face. Not much. The man had too much control for that. Too many years of discipline. But enough to show the wound had landed. Mr. Secretary, it's about maintaining command discipline. If General Merrick can ignore theater plans, ignore coordination requirements, ignore command authority, make you look slow. The words dropped like stones into still water. Ripples spreading, implications expanding. Ashford went rigid, back straighter, jaw clenched. Secretary Pemberton, I must protest that characterization. This is not about personal rivalry. This is about the integrity of military planning. This is about whether we have a professional military or a collection of glory seekers doing whatever. I'm not criticizing your methods, Reginald. I'm stating fact. Pemberton's voice quiet but relentless. Declan Merrick just crossed the Rhine with some boats and what he'll no doubt call aggressive initiative. You needed 2 months and over 1 million men to plan the same operation. How does that look? It looks like the difference between professionalism and recklessness, between proper military procedure and cowboy tactics. To you, to me, to everyone who fought in the last war. Pemberton paused. Let the silence work. But to the men in the field, to the correspondents writing stories, to history taking notes. Ashford said nothing, but his hands were clenched at his sides. White knuckles, tension radiating. Pemberton continued quieter now, more personal. I've defended your methods for 3 years, Reginald. Careful preparation, overwhelming force, minimal casualties. It's the professional way, the way I believe modern warfare should be conducted. It's what I told you was right when I gave you 2 months to plan this crossing. He gestured toward the preparations, the artillery parks, the vehicle staging areas, the massive machinery of Ashford's offensive, all of it still waiting, still ready, still perfectly positioned for an attack that no longer mattered. But watching Merrick cross the Rhine in one night with a fraction of the resources forces me to ask uncomfortable questions about doctrine, about tempo, about what modern warfare actually requires versus what we think it should require. Mr. Secretary, if you're suggesting that cowboy tactics, I'm suggesting that speed achieves results we can no longer match through preparation alone. I'm suggesting that the nature of warfare may have changed while we weren't paying attention. The silence between them was vast. Unbridgeable, a chasm opening. Finally, Ashford spoke, voice hollow. So you're choosing him over me. I'm choosing to win this war before it costs more lives than necessary. Before the Soviets occupy all of Eastern Europe. By rewarding insubordination. By recognizing that we're fighting a different war than the one you prepared for. What Ashford didn't know, what Pemberton had never told anyone, was that this moment had been building for months. The doubt creeping in. The questions accumulating, the slow realization that everything he believed might be wrong. December 1944. Bastogne surrounded, German forces pushing hard, the Battle of the Bulge reaching its crisis point, snow falling, temperature dropping, situation deteriorating by the hour. Pemberton had been in the command post when the assessments came in. Ashford's First Army was closest to Bastogne, 40 miles, maybe 50 by road. Ashford had assessed the situation with his usual thoroughness, calculated the variables, determined that relief would require proper preparation. Coordinate with air support once weather cleared, establish supply lines, clear roads, move methodically to avoid overextension. A week, maybe more, but done correctly, done professionally. Merrick's Third Army was further away, 100 miles, bad roads, worse weather. Merrick had gotten there in 72 hours. 72 hours. Pemberton had read the after-action reports in disbelief. Merrick's tanks had driven through blizzards, through terrain that armor wasn't supposed to traverse, through German positions that should have stopped them cold. His supply lines were chaos. His coordination was improvised. His adherence to doctrine was non-existent. But he'd arrived, smashed through German lines, relieved the siege, saved 10,000 American soldiers. That night, Pemberton had sat alone in his quarters. Glass of whiskey, private journal, thoughts never meant for other eyes. He'd written, "Merrick does in days what takes us weeks. Is this the future of American warfare? Or just the exception that proves the rule? And if it is the future, what does that say about everything? I've built my career defending." The questions had haunted him. Then January, watching Ashford's methodical advance through Germany, every move calculated, every objective secured before moving to the next, supply lines maintained, casualties minimal, everything by the book, everything professional. Meanwhile, Merrick's Third Army raced across France like a brush fire, 80 miles one week, 90 the next. The Germans couldn't establish defensive lines because by the time they understood where Merrick was, he was somewhere else. 40 miles further, 50, moving at speeds that armor units weren't supposed to sustain. Another diary entry, February this time, after midnight, alone with doubts. The Americans have learned to move faster than we can think. Not we as in America, we as in the old guard, the planners, the men like me who fought the last war and swore we'd never repeat its mistakes. But what if our caution is the mistake? What if speed is the new wisdom and we're too old to see it? Pemberton had wrestled with these questions in private, late at night, alone with his whiskey and his fears, and the growing realization that everything he'd built his career on might be obsolete. He defended Ashford publicly, praised his professionalism, championed his methods, gave him resources and time and full support. But privately, he'd begun to wonder. And now, standing on a German airfield, watching Ashford's elaborate preparations while Merrick's forces advanced miles inland, Pemberton knew the truth he'd been avoiding for months. The doctrine he'd defended his entire life had been surpassed by reality. Ashford was still waiting, still standing rigid, still expecting an answer, still believing that protocol and professionalism and proper military procedure would prevail because they always had, because they were right, because the alternative was chaos. Pemberton looked at this 55-year-old general who represented everything he'd believed in, who'd done everything asked of him, who'd prepared brilliantly. Who deserved better than this moment? "Reginald, I haven't made my final decision, but I need you to understand something. This isn't about you versus Merrick. It's not about who's the better general. You're both brilliant. You're both necessary. Then why does it feel like you're choosing him? Because right now in this moment, his method is what the war requires. Not because your method is wrong, but because the situation has changed faster than our doctrine could adapt." Ashford looked at him. Really looked, searching for something, understanding, perhaps, or at least honesty. "What do you want me to do? Proceed with Operation Thunderclap as planned. Show the world what American professionalism looks like. Let the correspondents write their stories. But understand that the strategic significance has changed. You're not crossing first. You're crossing correctly. Second place is still losing, Mr. Secretary. Not if history remembers both crossings. Merrick's for speed, yours for excellence. Different values, both important." Ashford nodded once, sharp, professional. But something had died in his eyes. Some belief, some faith. He saluted, turned, walked back toward his headquarters. Pemberton watched him go, felt the weight of what he'd just done, what he was about to do. He'd chosen speed over preparation, results over protocol, the future over the past. And Reginald Ashford would never forgive him. While Pemberton slept in his quarters in France, while Ashford made final adjustments to Operation Thunderclap, while the whole Allied command structure prepared for dawn, Declan Merrick was already moving. The scene played out 40 miles south of Ashford's positions. Oppenheim, small German town on the Rhine's western bank. Population maybe 3,000 before the war, now mostly empty, abandoned, windows dark, streets silent. Not strategically important. No major bridges, no critical road junctions. Just another town along a river that had stopped armies since Caesar. But Merrick had seen something others missed. He stood on the riverbank, 48 years old. No ivory pistols tonight. No polished boots. Plain combat fatigues. Helmet without rank insignia. Face darkened with soot. Just another soldier in the darkness. That was his way when operations required stealth. Save the theater for victories. For planning, be invisible. His operations officer stood beside him. Colonel Thomas Bradford, 42 years old, career soldier, man who'd been with Merrick since North Africa, understood his commander's thinking, could finish his sentences, could anticipate decisions. General weather's shifting, cloud cover breaking up. If we're going to do this, it's now or never. Moon rises in 2 hours. Merrick looked across the river. 600 yards of black water, cold, fast-moving. March snowmelt swelling the current. On the far side, German positions, machine guns, mortars. Soldiers who'd been told to hold the Rhine at all costs. Hitler's last natural barrier. Make them pay for every yard. Intelligence update. German 159th Division, under strength. We estimate 4,000 effectives. But dug in, they've been fortifying for weeks. They know we're here. Do they know when? They expect dawn. Everyone expects dawn. That's when First Army crosses upstream. That's when the whole world expects the American offensive to begin. Merrick nodded, pulled out the intelligence summary he'd received 3 weeks ago. G2 report dated March 1st. German forces at Oppenheim withdrawing, redeploying north toward Mainz. Window of opportunity 2 to 3 weeks before positions reinforced. 3 weeks ago, he'd watched Ashford's Operation Thunderclap planning continue on schedule. Watched the timeline remain fixed. Watched the opportunity window narrowing, closing, soon to disappear entirely. Merrick had tried, had sent liaison officers, had suggested acceleration, had been politely told that the plan was set, that coordination required adherence to schedule. That improvisation created risk, so he'd made a decision. Tom, I've been watching Ashford prepare this crossing for 2 months. Know what the Germans have been doing for 2 months? Fortifying their positions. Exactly. Every day Reginald spends planning, they spend preparing. By the time he's ready to cross, they'll be ready to defend. Perfect preparation meets perfect defense. And men die, lots of men. So we go now. We go now, tonight. Before they're ready, before they expect it, before the window closes completely, before anyone can tell us not to. Ashford's going to be furious. Merrick smiled, thin, hard, the smile of a man who'd made his peace with consequences. Ashford's going to be fine. He'll cross at dawn with his 1,000 guns and his airborne assault and his carefully orchestrated victory. He'll get his glory, his way, his timeline. And we'll already be on the other side. Speed, Tom, that's our artillery prep. Speed is our air cover. We move so fast they can't react, can't adapt, can't organize coherent defense. By the time they understand what's happening, we're already 5 miles inland. Bradford looked at him for a long moment. 20 years of military service, enough experience to know what this meant. You know, Supreme Headquarters didn't authorize this. Supreme Headquarters doesn't authorize initiative. They authorize plans. This is initiative. This is seeing opportunity and taking it before it vanishes. They'll try to court-martial you. Merrick looked across the river, at Germany, at the war that had consumed 4 years of his life, at the enemy that had to be defeated. Let them, after we win. 10 minutes later, the first boats hit the water. 600 assault boats, 12,000 men, sliding across the Rhine in darkness. No engines. Just paddles and current and grim determination. Infantry mostly, some engineers, minimal heavy weapons, nothing that made noise, nothing that gave warning, silent as death. German sentries on the eastern bank heard something, maybe, hard to tell over the river's sound, over the wind through trees. Could be boats, could be lungs floating in current, could be nothing. They radioed confused reports to company headquarters. Possible crossing attempt, multiple points, unknown scale, request instructions. But possible doesn't sound urgent. Possible can wait until dawn, until visibility improves, until they're sure. By the time German commanders understood that possible was definite, American soldiers were on the eastern bank, climbing out of boats, forming perimeters, silencing machine gun nests with knives and bayonets. No shots fired, no alarms raised, silent as ghosts. By the time German reinforcements arrived at 200 hours, American soldiers had established a bridgehead a mile deep, defensive positions, mortars emplaced, anti-tank guns positioned. By dawn, by the time Ashford's Operation Thunderclap was scheduled to begin, Merrick's Third Army controlled 5 miles of the eastern shore. Engineers were building pontoon bridges. Tanks were crossing. The exploitation force was already moving inland. And when Merrick finally called Supreme Headquarters at 0630 hours, his message was characteristically brief. To chafe forward from Third Army Commander Oppenheim secured. 12,000 effectives across. Casualties 28 killed, 61 wounded. Bridgehead expanding. Continuing advance. Third Army sends regards. Regards. Like he'd done something routine. Something unremarkable. Something that didn't just invalidate 2 months of planning and shift the balance of American military doctrine. and force Aldrich Pemberton to choose between two competing visions of how war should be fought. The phone call had gone to Harrison Caldwell first, 60 years old, four-star general, chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, man who'd spent 2 years managing the impossible task of coordinating Allied operations across multiple theaters. Europe, Pacific, political considerations, military necessities, British demands, Soviet cooperation, American public opinion. It was like conducting an orchestra where every musician thought they should be leading, and half of them couldn't read the same sheet music. Caldwell answered on the first ring. He never slept much anymore. 4 hours if he was lucky, usually less. Caldwell. Harrison, Declan, quick update. Caldwell's stomach dropped. That tone, that casual offhand tone. When Merrick used that tone, empires trembled and careers ended, and strategic plans burned. What did you do, Declan? We crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim, used assault boats, minimal casualties. Bridgehead secured. Thought you'd want to know before the morning briefing. Silence on the line. Long silence. Caldwell's mind racing, processing, understanding the magnitude, the implications, the catastrophe. Declan, please tell me you coordinated this with Ashford. Reg has his own crossing tomorrow. Didn't want to bother him with details. He's got enough on his mind with Operation Thunderclap. More silence, longer this time. Caldwell could feel his blood pressure spiking, could feel the beginning of what would probably be a career-ending headache. Finally, George Washington once said, "Discipline is the soul of an army." Do you know that quote, Declan? I also know he crossed the Delaware on Christmas night. No authorization, no coordination. Just saw opportunity and took it. That was different. Was it Harrison Germany's collapsing? Every day we wait gives the Soviets more ground. Every day spent in careful preparation is a day Stalin's forces advance 50 miles. We needed to be across the Rhine yesterday. Ashford was going to wait until tomorrow, so I went today. You just created the biggest command crisis of the war. I just shortened the war. Ashford will understand, eventually. Maybe. Caldwell hung up, sat in darkness, thought about his own career, thought about having to explain this to Pemberton, to the British, to the press, to history. Then he picked up the phone again, called his chief of staff. Get me Secretary Pemberton. I don't care what time it is. Wake him if you have to. Merrick just crossed the Rhine. Sir, that's wonderful news. Without authorization, without coordination, 12 hours before Operation Thunderclap was scheduled to begin. Ashford's going to demand his head, and he'll be within his rights. The chief of staff went silent, understanding dawning. Oh God, get me Pemberton. Now. Pemberton had received the call at 2:47 a.m. Deep sleep, first real sleep in days, dreaming of something pleasant. Home, his wife, gardens in spring, peace. The phone shattered it. Caldwell's voice. Tight, controlled. The voice of a man delivering news he wished wasn't true. The voice of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Sir, we have a situation. And just like that, Pemberton was fully awake. In war, situation was code for catastrophe. For everything you planned is now worthless. For make impossible decisions immediately. Talk to me, Harrison. Third Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim beginning 22:37 hours yesterday. Merrick's forces are currently 5 miles inland. Casualties under 30. Operation successful by all tactical measures. Pemberton sat up, brain engaging, processing. Operation what operation? There was no operation scheduled for. No, sir, there wasn't. Merrick conducted an unauthorized crossing, without notifying theater command, without coordinating with adjacent units, without anyone's permission. Understanding crashed over him like cold water, like drowning, like the moment you realize the ground beneath you isn't there anymore. Merrick crossed without authorization. Yes, sir. 12 hours before Thunderclap. Yes, sir. Jesus Christ, Harrison. This is, I know, sir, Ashford is going to demand his head. And honestly, sir, he'll have every right. This is insubordination at the strategic level. This violates every principle of military coordination and command discipline. Pemberton was already out of bed, already pulling on trousers, mind racing ahead to consequences. Political, military, alliance implications, press coverage, public perception, historical judgment. What's the tactical situation right now? Third Army is advancing rapidly. Germans are falling back. Minimal resistance. Merrick's exploitation force is moving at maximum speed. By the time sun comes up, He'll have a bridgehead 10 miles wide and 15 deep. And Ashford hasn't been formally notified yet. That's your call, sir. But he'll know soon. You can't hide a river crossing. The intelligence network will pick it up within hours. Pemberton closed his eyes, thought about promises made, commitments given, trust built over 3 years of war. No, let him sleep. Let him have one more night believing his operation will be the triumph of American arms. Let him have that. He's earned it. He'll know soon enough. Sir, with respect, he needs to know now. He has 1,000 reporters waiting to cover what they think will be the biggest story of. I said let him sleep, Harrison. That's an order. I'll tell him myself when I arrive, face to face. He deserves that much. Yes, sir. Pemberton dressed in the dark, every motion automatic, muscle memory from 4 decades of military and diplomatic service. Shirt, tie, jacket, shoes, each piece of armor against the world. His hands shook, not from fear, from anger, from the realization that Merrick had just forced his hand, had created a crisis that couldn't be managed, couldn't be spun, couldn't be anything except what it was. A maverick general had ignored orders, violated protocol, and succeeded spectacularly. And now Pemberton had to decide what that meant. For Merrick, for Ashford, for American military doctrine, for the future. He looked at himself in the mirror, 70 years old, 50 years of service. Too old for this, too old to be refereeing battles between competing visions of warfare. But that's what leadership was, making impossible choices, living with consequences, knowing you'd be judged by history and having no idea what verdict history would render. Mr. Secretary, his aide at the door, young lieutenant, also awakened, also trying to understand. Your car is ready? Pemberton straightened his tie one final time. Let's go witness history, one way or another, and stepped into the cold pre-dawn darkness. Dawn broke over Germany, cold and gray and unforgiving, the kind of morning where breath mists and metal burns fingers, and men question why they're fighting in a country that wanted to conquer the world. At First Army headquarters, staff officers moved with quiet efficiency. Final preparations, final checks, final coordination for Operation Thunderclap. In 6 hours, American forces would cross the Rhine in what was supposed to be the largest opposed river crossing since Normandy. Perhaps since Alexander. Perhaps ever. In 6 hours, the world would see what American military professionalism could achieve. Except the world had already seen something else. The first report came at 6:18 a.m. Radio operator receiving confirmation from signals intelligence assets, monitoring German communications across the river, intercepted Wehrmacht transmissions. Panicked, confused. American forces on Eastern Bank. Multiple positions, estimated division strength. Nationality confirmed, Third Army insignia on captured prisoners. The operator hesitated. Read it again. Third Army, that was Merrick's command. But Merrick wasn't part of Operation Thunderclap. Merrick's sector was 40 miles south. Merrick wasn't scheduled to do anything except supporting operations, fixing German forces in place. Nothing major, nothing newsworthy. He brought it to the operations officer, Captain Reynolds, 31 years old, regular Army, by the book, who brought it to the executive officer, who brought it to the chief of staff, Colonel James Morrison, 50 years old, serving with Ashford since North Africa. Morrison read the message. Once, twice. Face going from confused to comprehending to horrified. He brought it to Reginald Ashford. Ashford was in his office. Private space. Maps on every wall. Pins showing positions. Lines showing objectives. The careful geometry of Operation Thunderclap laid out in red and blue and black. Months of work. Thousands of hours. Perfect. He took the message from Morrison. Read it without expression. His face didn't change. Didn't register shock or anger or surprise. That would be undisciplined. That would be unprofessional. Ashford had spent 33 years learning to control his emotions, to present the same face regardless of circumstances. But everyone in the room felt the temperature drop, felt something shift, like air pressure changing before a storm, like the moment before an avalanche when the mountain decides to let go. When Ashford finally spoke, his voice was arctic, precise, each word ice. Merrick has deliberately sabotaged Allied strategy to satisfy his ego. This is insubordination at the strategic level. This is a violation of every principle of military command and coordination. I want him relieved immediately. I want him court-martialed. I want him reduced in rank and sent home, today. Morrison tried to moderate. Sir, the crossing was successful. Third Army is expanding the bridgehead. Enemy resistance is minimal. Casualties are... Ashford cut him off, not with volume, with precision, like a scalpel. Success is irrelevant, Colonel. Discipline is paramount. Results don't justify insubordination. If General Merrick is allowed to ignore command authority, then we have chaos, not coalition. We have individual glory seekers, not professional military operations. We have anarchy. He turned to his communications officer. Draft an immediate message to Secretary Pemberton. Text as follows: American general has conducted unauthorized operation violating agreed strategic framework. Request you demand. General Caldwell relieve Merrick immediately of command. First Army cannot operate alongside commanders who ignore chain of command and endanger operational security. Sir Secretary Pemberton is en route here. He'll arrive within the hour. Perhaps you should... Then he can answer me in person. Send it anyway. I want this on record, today, now, before anyone thinks this kind of behavior is acceptable, before anyone thinks that results excuse insubordination. The message went out, urgent, formal, a career officer demanding justice for what he saw as a fundamental violation of everything military service represented: protocol, discipline, order, chain of command, planning, coordination, the bonds that held armies together and separated professional forces from armed mobs. Merrick had violated all of it, and Ashford wanted him punished, wanted the punishment to mean something, wanted it to send a message to every commander who might think individual initiative mattered more than collective planning. Meanwhile, 20 miles south, Merrick's tanks rolled east, faster than planning, faster than caution, faster than fear or doubt or second thoughts. The German commander facing them stood in his improvised command post. Commandeered farmhouse, maps spread across kitchen table, radio equipment crackling with reports. All bad. Oberst Heinrich Kaufmann, 56 years old, Eastern Front veteran, knew what defeat looked like, knew what desperation smelled like, knew when an army was dying. He studied the map, red markers showing American positions, advancing on 3 axes, moving at speeds that shouldn't be possible, moving like they didn't care about flanks or supply lines or consolidation, just moving. Herr Oberst, they're not stopping. Kind of pause. No pause for consolidation. No pause for resupply. They just keep coming, like water, like they'll never stop. Kaufmann stared at the map, tried to understand, tried to apply doctrine, tried to find the pattern. Where would they consolidate? Where would they pause? Where was the opportunity for counterattack? But there was no pattern, no pause, no opportunity. This wasn't textbook warfare. This wasn't the methodical American approach he'd studied. He'd fought Americans in Sicily, in Italy, in France. He knew their patterns. Careful advance, overwhelming firepower, methodical consolidation. This was different. This was fury. This was momentum unchecked. This was an enemy that believed speed itself was a weapon. Herr Oberst orders. Kaufmann looked at his remaining forces. 4,000 men, maybe less. Understrength battalions. Replacements who'd had 3 weeks of training. Old men and boys playing soldier while the world collapsed around them. Fall back to secondary positions. Prepare delaying actions. We can't stop them, but we can make them pay for time. But even as he gave the order, Kaufmann knew it was futile. You couldn't delay an enemy moving this fast. By the time you established a position, they'd already flanked it, already bypassed it, already somewhere else. By noon, Merrick's forces had advanced 15 miles. By sunset, 25. Speed. Pure, devastating speed. The kind that doesn't give defenders time to think, to plan, to establish positions. The kind that turns warfare into chaos and chaos into rout. The kind that wins wars. Pemberton's aircraft landed at 10:52 a.m. Later than planned. Weather delays, headwinds. The universe itself seemed reluctant to bring him to this moment. The reception committee was still assembled, still waiting. But the atmosphere had changed. Word had spread, whispered conversations, sidelong glances. The correspondents sensed something, sensed the story had shifted, sensed that what they'd come to witness wasn't what was actually happening. Operation Thunderclap was no longer the main event, no longer the story they'd file, no longer the triumph that would define the American military. Merrick had stolen that. Stolen it in one night. Stolen it with boats and audacity and complete disregard for protocol. Ashford stood at attention, waiting, back ramrod straight, face carved from New England granite, jaw clenched so tight Pemberton could see the muscle working, but controlled, perfectly controlled. The man was iron. Pemberton descended the stairs, measured steps, returned Ashford's salute. General Ashford, I received your message. Walk with me. Not let's talk. Not we need to discuss. Just walk with me. Command disguised as invitation. They moved away from the crowd, away from cameras and witnesses and the machinery of public relations, out toward the perimeter where artillery pieces stood ready, where thousands of men waited for orders that would come but wouldn't matter the way they were supposed to. Behind them, the stage remained set for a triumph that had already happened somewhere else. They walked 40 yards in silence, each man gathering thoughts, preparing arguments, steeling themselves for conversation that would define careers and doctrine and futures. Pemberton spoke first. I know you're angry. Angry doesn't begin to cover it, Mr. Secretary. Ashford's voice tight, controlled, glass about to shatter. Furious, betrayed, insulted, but mostly confused. Confused about how a general can violate every principle of military command and apparently face no consequences. I haven't decided on consequences yet. Then let me help you decide. Merrick conducted an unauthorized offensive operation. He violated theater coordination. He ignored command structure. He endangered operational security. Any one of those is grounds for relief. All four together demand court-martial. Pemberton nodded. You're right. By every standard of military discipline, Merrick deserves punishment. Ashford's eyes flashed. Hope, maybe. Vindication. Then, but I need you to answer some questions first. Questions I need honest answers to. Not political answers, not career-protecting answers. Honest answers. Ashford stiffened. I've never lied to you, Mr. Secretary. I know, that's why I'm asking. Pemberton stopped walking, turned to face Ashford directly. 3 weeks ago, your G2 received intelligence that German forces at Oppenheim were withdrawing, creating a gap in their defensive line. A window of opportunity. Did you receive that intelligence? Ashford's face flickered. Just slightly. Recognition. Understanding where this was going. Yes, sir, we received it. What did you do with it? I evaluated it against our operational timeline for Thunderclap. Determined that accelerating the schedule would create coordination problems with air support, artillery positioning, and logistics. You decided not to act on it. I decided that sticking to our prepared plan was superior to improvising based on unconfirmed intelligence that might be German deception. That maintaining operational security and coordination was more important than tactical opportunism. Pemberton nodded slowly, and Merrick received the same intelligence. Apparently so, and made the opposite decision. Saw the window, saw it closing, decided to act before it vanished. Decided to violate command structure and ignore theater planning, yes. Or decided to seize an opportunity you missed. The words hung in cold German air. Accusation, judgment, truth. Ashford's face flushed. Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, I didn't miss anything. I evaluated the intelligence and made a command decision based on proper military procedure. Merrick saw an opportunity for personal glory and ignored everything else. Those are not the same thing. Aren't they, Reginald? You had the same intelligence Merrick had. You saw the same window. You made a choice to prioritize your plan over the opportunity. That's a valid choice. That's proper military thinking. But it's still a choice. And Merrick made a different one. A reckless one. A successful one. 28 casualties. 5 miles inland by dawn. The bridgehead is expanding as we speak. By tonight, he'll have 15 miles. By tomorrow, 30. And the Germans can't stop him because he's moving too fast for them to establish coherent defense. Ashford was silent, face working, emotions warring behind iron control. Pemberton continued, gentler now. I'm not saying your choice was wrong. I'm saying Merrick's choice was different. And right now, his choice is achieving results faster than careful planning can match. At what cost, at what risk, he had no proper intelligence about the far shore. No artillery preparation, no air support. If the Germans had been stronger, if they'd been ready, his entire force could have been massacred on that river. But they weren't ready, because Merrick saw what you saw, that they were withdrawing, that the window was open, and he acted while it was still open instead of waiting for the perfect moment. I was waiting for the right moment, the prepared moment, The moment when success was certain, not just possible. Pemberton nodded. I know. And that's the difference between you. You want certainty. Merrick accepts risk. You want overwhelming force. Merrick wants overwhelming speed. Neither is wrong, but right now, speed is winning. The silence stretched. Ashford looked across at his carefully prepared offensive. The artillery, the vehicles, the supply dumps, months of work, thousands of hours. Perfect planning, all of it now secondary. All of it now just proof that someone else had been faster. Finally, Ashford spoke, voice quiet, almost broken. So you're choosing him over me? I'm choosing to win this war before the Soviets occupy all of Eastern Europe. I'm choosing results over protocol. I'm choosing speed over certainty. Pemberton paused. But I'm not choosing him over you. I need you both. You can't have it both ways, Mr. Secretary. Either discipline matters or it doesn't. Either chain of command means something or it's just words. You have to choose. No, I don't, because this war isn't about choosing between two generals. It's about understanding that we need different methods for different moments. Your careful planning saved thousands of lives at Normandy. Merrick's aggressive exploitation saved Bastogne. Both mattered. Both were necessary. But only one of us crossed the Rhine first. And there it was, the heart of it, the wound that wouldn't heal. Pemberton had no answer for that. Because Ashford was right. History would remember who crossed first. And it wasn't the man who planned carefully. It was the man who moved fast. They returned to headquarters in silence. Ashford's face a mask, Pemberton's mind racing through implications and consequences and political calculations. Inside, staff officers worked with quiet efficiency, adjusting plans, adapting to new reality, coordinating with Third Army's unexpected advance, making the best of chaos. Pemberton's aide approached. Sir General Caldwell on secure line. He says it's urgent. Pemberton took the call in Ashford's office. Private, door closed. Harrison? Sir, situation update. Third Army has advanced 18 miles as of 1200 hours. German resistance is collapsing faster than intelligence predicted. Merrick's forward elements are approaching Hanau. At current pace, he'll reach Frankfurt within 48 hours. Pemberton closed his eyes. Frankfurt, major city, strategic objective, part of the endgame. Merrick was going to reach it days ahead of schedule, maybe weeks. What's Ashford's reaction? He's proceeding with thunderclap as planned. But sir, the press knows something's wrong. They're asking questions. They know Third Army crossed first. The story is leaking. Let it leak. The truth will come out anyway. Better to control the narrative than let rumors spin out of control. How do you want to spin it, sir? Pemberton thought. Political calculation, public perception, historical judgment. How do you explain that two generals crossed the same river in different ways and both were right, but one was faster? Tell them the truth. American forces have crossed the Rhine at 2 points. Third Army's unexpected crossing created opportunities we're exploiting. First Army's prepared offensive ensures we maintain momentum and coordination. Both operations are succeeding. Both reflect American military excellence. That sounds like political doublespeak, sir. That's because it is, but it's true. Both operations are succeeding, just not the way anyone planned. After the call, Pemberton sat alone, thinking about promises made, commitments broken, trust damaged beyond repair. His personal physician entered, Dr. Marcus Whitfield, 62 years old, had been Pemberton's doctor for 20 years, also his friend, one of the few people who saw behind the mask. Aldrich, you look exhausted. I am exhausted, Marcus. The war is ending. You should be celebrating. Should I? Pemberton gestured out the window, at the preparations for Operation Thunderclap, at the massive machinery of war waiting to be used. Look at all this. Months of planning, billions of dollars in equipment, hundreds of thousands of men, all of it now secondary to what one general did in one night with some boats. Whitfield poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher on the desk, handed one to Pemberton. You're being too hard on yourself. Am I Marcus? I made a promise to Reginald Ashford, told him his operation would be the centerpiece of Allied victory, gave him my word, my support. And now I'm about to tell him it doesn't matter because someone else was faster. You didn't tell Merrick to cross? No, but I created the conditions that made it necessary. I gave Ashford 2 months when the war required 2 weeks. I prioritized perfect planning over speed, and Merrick saw what I couldn't see, that we were running out of time. Whitfield sat down, studied his friend. What are you going to do? I'm going to make the hardest decision of my career. I'm going to keep Merrick in command. I'm going to tell Ashford his demand for court-martial is denied. And I'm going to watch everything I believed about military professionalism crumble. You believe you're making the right choice. I don't know. Ask me in 20 years when we see how it turned out. The decision was made at 1500 hours. Pemberton drafted it himself. Handwritten. Personal. The weight of ink on paper making permanent what couldn't be unsaid. To General Harrison Caldwell, Chief of Staff from Aldrich Pemberton, Secretary of War request for relief of General Declan Merrick, General. I have received Lieutenant General Reginald Ashford's request that Major General Declan Merrick be relieved of command for unauthorized Rhine crossing. After careful consideration of tactical, strategic, and operational factors, I must decline to support this request. General Merrick's operation, while uncoordinated with theater planning, was successful and contributes to Allied objectives. German forces are in retreat. American casualties remain minimal. The bridgehead is secure and expanding rapidly. Current exploitation by Third Army creates opportunities we must capitalize on immediately. Relieving Merrick at this juncture would disrupt ongoing operations and surrender momentum to the enemy. I recommend no disciplinary action be taken at this time. Post-war review of command procedures and coordination protocols is appropriate once hostilities cease. He paused. Everything in him screamed to stop here. Keep it formal. Keep it clean. Let the decision stand without explanation or justification. But he added a postscript, handwritten at the bottom, personal, the truth beneath the official language. Harrison, keep Merrick moving. We can't afford to match his speed, but we can't afford to lose it either. The war is ending, but the peace is beginning. Every mile Third Army advances is a mile the Soviets don't occupy. Speed matters now more than it ever has. Whatever the cost to protocol, we need that speed. He signed it, sealed it, sent it. Done. The die cast. The choice made. The future determined. Outside, he could hear Operation Thunderclap beginning, the artillery barrage that was supposed to announce American dominance. Now just sound and fury signifying nothing except that careful planning had been outpaced by aggressive initiative. Pemberton's aide appeared at the door. Sir General Ashford is requesting an audience. Tell him 30 minutes. Sir, he's quite insistent. 30 minutes, Captain. I need time to gather my thoughts, to prepare for what I have to say. Give me that. The aide saluted and withdrew. Pemberton stood, walked to the window, watched smoke rising from German positions, watched the careful choreography of Ashford's offensive, watched history happening while he stood in a requisitioned office and tried to understand what he'd just done. He'd chosen speed over discipline, results over protocol, the future over the past, Merrick over Ashford. No, not over, alongside. Different but equal, both necessary, both brilliant, both right in different ways. But Ashford wouldn't see it that way. Ashford would see betrayal, would see his career's culmination turned into footnote, would see everything he believed invalidated by one night of reckless audacity. And Pemberton had no words that would make that better, no explanation that would heal that wound, no political language that would disguise the fundamental truth he'd chosen Merrick's way over Ashford's. 30 minutes later, Ashford entered, still impeccable, still controlled. But something had changed in his eyes. Something had broken. Some belief, some faith, some core certainty about how the world worked and what mattered and who could be trusted. You've decided. Not a question, a statement, an accusation. I have. You're keeping Merrick. I am. Ashford nodded once. Sharp, precise. Military bearing maintained even as his world collapsed. Then I have nothing further to say, Mr. Secretary. He turned to leave. Reginald, wait, please. Ashford stopped. Didn't turn, just stood there, rigid, waiting for words that couldn't possibly make this better. Pemberton chose carefully. This isn't a rejection of you or your methods. You are one of the finest officers this nation has produced. Your planning saved thousands of lives. Your caution prevented disasters. Your professionalism set the standard for American military operations. But the word flat, emotionless, already knowing what came next. But the war has changed faster than our doctrine could adapt. The tempo has accelerated. We're no longer fighting for survival. We're racing the Soviets for position in the post-war world, and that race requires speed we've been reluctant to embrace. Ashford turned then, face expressionless. You're saying my way is obsolete. I'm saying the world needs both of you. Your discipline and his audacity, your planning and his execution, your caution and his risk-taking. But right now, in this moment, circumstances require his speed more than your preparation. And when his speed gets men killed, when his lack of preparation leads to disaster, when he walks unprepared into something that planning would have prevented, who will you blame then? Pemberton had no answer for that, because Ashford was right to ask, because speed had costs, because aggressive initiative meant accepting risks that careful planning would avoid. I don't know, but I know that waiting also gets men killed, that every day spent in preparation is a day the Soviets advance, that the window for shaping post-war Europe is closing and we need to move faster than perfection allows. Ashford looked at him for a long moment, really looked, searching for something, understanding perhaps, or at least honesty about what this moment meant. You've made your choice, Mr. Secretary. I'll execute my orders. I'll cross the Rhine tomorrow as planned. I'll coordinate with Third Army's advance. I'll do my duty as a professional soldier. Thank you, Reginald. But understand this, Ashford's voice quiet but steel underneath. Our relationship has changed. I'll follow your orders. I'll support your decisions. But I'll never trust your judgment again. And I'll never forgive you for choosing his recklessness over my professionalism. He saluted. Perfect form. Then walked out, door closing with deliberate gentleness. More devastating than any slam. Pemberton sat down, suddenly exhausted. 70 years old and feeling every one of them, feeling the weight of what he'd done, what he'd destroyed, what it would cost. His aide reappeared, young face concerned. Sir, there's a situation developing. Third Army has made contact with... Sir, you need to come see this yourself. April 4th, 1945. 12 days after the Rhine crossing, Merrick's Third Army had advanced with terrifying speed. 90 miles in 12 days. German resistance collapsing. Towns falling without a fight. The Wehrmacht retreating so fast, American forces struggled to keep pace, moving through countryside where spring was trying to arrive, where flowers bloomed despite war, where Germans stared from windows at the Americans passing through like a river in flood. It was exactly what Merrick had predicted, speed creating chaos, chaos preventing organized defense, victory through momentum. But speed has costs. The lead elements of Third Army rolled into Ohrdruf just after dawn. Small town in Thuringia, population maybe 5,000 before the war. Strategically insignificant. Not even on most maps, just another German village that happened to be in the way. Another place to pass through on the way to somewhere more important. Major James Whitmore commanded the reconnaissance unit, 26 years old, Harvard graduate, class of 1940, had joined the Army because that's what Harvard graduates did in 1942 when the world was ending, had seen action in France, had seen death in every form combat could produce, thought he'd seen everything. He was wrong. His Jeep rounded a corner at 0640 hours and stopped. At first, Whitmore couldn't process what he was seeing, brain refusing to accept the information his eyes were sending. The shapes didn't make sense. The arrangement was wrong. The scale was impossible. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be actual human bodies stacked like cordwood. Couldn't be real human beings reduced to stick figures and bones and the suggestion of humanity. Then understanding arrived, and with it horror. Horror so profound it bypassed thought and went straight to the body, to the gut, to the primal parts of the brain that recognize evil when they see it. Bodies, hundreds of them, thousands, scattered, piled, left where they fell or where they were thrown or where they'd been stacked, awaiting disposal when the camp was liberated before the guards could complete their work. The smell hit next, sweet, thick, choking. The smell of decay and death and something worse, something that bypassed the nose and went straight to memory. The smell that would never leave, that would wake him at 3 a.m. for the rest of his life, that would make him gag at random moments decades later when memory ambushed him without warning. Whitmore's driver vomited over the side of the Jeep, just leaned over and emptied his stomach. No shame, no trying to hold it back, just immediate physical rejection of what they were witnessing. Whitmore grabbed the radio, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Command, this is Echo 3. We've found... Jesus Christ. We've found something. Send everyone. Send everyone now. Send chaplains. Send medical. Just send everyone. His voice broke. 30 seconds in theater. 30 seconds looking at what man could do to man when all restraint was removed. 30 seconds that would define the rest of his life. What have you found, Echo 3? Whitmore looked at the camp, at the barracks, at the bodies, at the survivors stumbling toward them. Walking skeletons, Ghosts, people who'd been stripped of everything, including the appearance of humanity. Hell. We've found hell. Within the hour Merrick arrived, he'd been with forward elements, always with the forward elements. That was his style. Lead from the front, see the ground, make decisions in real time, never command from rear headquarters looking at maps. He climbed out of his command vehicle, 48 years old, still wearing the plain fatigues. No rank insignia, no theater, not today. Today was something different. Major Whitmore met him, face pale, eyes haunted, aged 10 years in 1 hour. Sir, I don't have words. Merrick looked past him, saw the camp, the barracks, the bodies, the physical evidence of systematic murder on an industrial scale, the proof that everything they'd been fighting for was real, that the enemy they faced was evil beyond comprehension. He'd known, intellectually he'd known, intelligence reports about concentration camps, rumors of atrocities, whispered stories from refugees, evidence from Poland, from Eastern Europe, from places the Soviets had liberated. But knowing and seeing are different. Knowing is abstract, seeing is concrete. Knowing is intellectual, seeing is visceral. Knowing is something you can file away. Seeing is something that changes you forever. How many? His voice barely audible. We don't know yet, sir. Thousands. The survivors say 10,000 were here at peak. Most were marched out when they heard us coming. Death march, left to die on the roads. These are the ones too sick to move, the ones they shot and left, the ones they didn't have time to burn. Survivors. There were survivors, people who'd lived through this, people who'd witnessed it all and somehow kept breathing. Merrick walked into the camp, each step requiring conscious effort, each step taking him deeper into understanding of what they'd been fighting, why it mattered, what was at stake beyond territory and politics and strategic considerations. His soldiers stood scattered throughout the camp, silent, shocked. Men who'd fought across Europe, who'd seen death in every form combat could produce, who'd watched friends die, who'd killed enemies without hesitation, standing mute and broken by this, by murder industrialized, by cruelty systematized, by evil made routine. A sergeant approached, Master Sergeant Robert Chen, 38 years old. Regular Army, 15 years of service. Had seen everything the Army could show him, until today. General, the survivors, they want to thank us. They keep trying to thank us. They think we came to save them. Merrick couldn't speak, throat closed, eyes burning with tears he wouldn't let fall. Not here, not in front of his men. Later. Alone, but not here. But the thought wouldn't leave him. We came to save them, but we're 12 days late. If he'd crossed the Rhine on March 10th instead of March 22nd, if he'd pushed harder, moved faster, ignored every caution and protocol and coordination requirement, if he'd been even more reckless, even more aggressive, even more willing to sacrifice protocol for speed, how many more would be alive? The question would haunt him for the rest of his life, would wake him at 3 a.m. in cold sweat, would make him question every decision, would turn victory into guilt and triumph into ash. He'd move fast, crossed in one night, advanced 90 miles in 12 days. Speed, audacity, initiative. And he'd arrived 12 days too late for thousands of people. Colonel Bradford found him 2 hours later. Merrick was standing alone at the camp perimeter, staring at nothing, face empty, hollowed out, looking at something invisible, something internal, some calculation that had no answer. Sir, we've contacted Supreme Headquarters. Secretary Pemberton is being notified. He's ordering full documentation. Photographers, medical personnel, war crimes investigators. He wants everything recorded. Merrick nodded, didn't look at him, kept staring at nothing. Sir, this isn't your fault, isn't it? The words flat, dead. Tom, we've been racing across Germany, making excellent time, breaking speed records, winning the war faster than anyone thought possible. I've been so proud of our pace, our audacity, our refusal to slow down for anyone or anything. He finally looked at Bradford, eyes red, face aged years and hours. But not fast enough for them. Not fast enough for the people in that camp. Not fast enough for the 10,000 who were here. Not fast enough for the ones who died yesterday or last week or last month while we were planning and preparing and coordinating. Sir, Ashford was right about something. Speed without preparation means you don't know what you're walking into. You don't have psychological support ready. You don't have proper documentation protocols. You don't have chaplains briefed. You don't have anything except shock soldiers who'll carry this for the rest of their lives. Bradford had no response to that, because it was true. Because Merrick's aggressive speed had gotten them here fast but unprepared. Because soldiers who should have been mentally briefed were instead ambushed by horror they couldn't process. Merrick turned back to the camp. Get every camera we have, every piece of film, document everything, every body, every building, every inch of this place. Photograph it all, record it all, make sure the world sees what we're seeing. Yes, sir. And round up the townspeople, every adult within 5 miles, German civilians who lived here, who smelled this, who saw the smoke, who heard the screams. They're going to see this. They're going to look at what was done in their country, in their name, with their silent permission, and they're going to remember. Yes, sir. And Tom, Merrick's voice cracking, get me a line to Ashford. I need to tell him he was right about something. The photographs reached Pemberton 3 days later at Supreme Headquarters in Frankfurt, delivered by courier, sealed envelope, eyes only, warning on the cover, sensitive material, extreme content. Pemberton had seen combat footage, had reviewed battlefield casualties, had studied photographs of bombing raids and artillery barrages and all the various ways modern warfare destroyed human bodies. This was different. He opened the envelope, pulled out the first photograph, just looked, couldn't look away, couldn't process. Mind refusing to believe that human beings could do this to other human beings, that industrial civilization could turn murder into systematic routine, that evil could be organized with such efficiency. His hands shook holding the photograph. Dr. Whitfield stood nearby, had insisted on being present when Pemberton reviewed the Ohrdruf documentation, knew his friend would need support, would need someone to witness his witnessing. How many camps? Pemberton's voice distant, mechanical, disconnected from emotion. Intelligence believes dozens, sir, scattered across Germany and occupied territories. Ohrdruf is just the first we've found, just the beginning. Dear God. Whitfield said nothing. What was there to say? What words existed for this? Pemberton set down the photograph, picked up another. Worse. Bodies stacked. Then another. Survivors. Walking skeletons. Eyes too large for faces. Humanity stripped away until only suffering remained. Each photograph a testament to evil so profound it defied description. So systematic it required documentation because no one would believe the testimony without proof. Finally, Pemberton couldn't look anymore. Put them down, walked to the window, stared out at Frankfurt, at Germany, at the country that had produced this, that had organized this, that had made murder industrial. This is why we fight. Sir Pemberton turned back, looked at the photographs scattered across his desk. I've spent 4 years managing coalitions, balancing interests, coordinating strategies, political considerations, alliance management. Sometimes I forgot the fundamental reason, the core purpose. We're not just fighting to defeat Germany, we're fighting to stop this. He picked up one photograph again, forced himself to look, to really see, to not turn away. Merrick's speed, Ashford's caution, my coordination. All of it matters less than I thought. We should have been faster. All of us should have moved heaven and earth to get here sooner, should have crossed the Rhine in January, in December, should have been willing to accept any cost to end this sooner. Sir, we got here as fast as we could. Did we get here as fast as our doctrine allowed, as fast as proper military procedure permitted? What if proper procedure was too slow? What if caution cost lives we were supposed to save? The question hung in the air, unanswerable, haunting. Pemberton picked up the phone. Get me General Ashford. The call connected within minutes. Ashford's voice crisp, professional, cold. The distance that had opened between them still there, still unbridged. Mr. Secretary? Reginald, have you seen the photographs from Ohrdruf? Pause, then quietly, I have. I need to ask you something, not as Secretary of War, not as your superior, as one man to another. Silence on the line, waiting. Pemberton continued, voice tight, controlled, barely. If Operation Thunderclap had proceeded as originally planned, if Merrick hadn't crossed early, if we'd waited those extra 12 days, Would your preparation have included intelligence about these camps? Long silence. Then Ashford, barely audible. Yes, G2 had reports. Fragmentary, unconfirmed. But yes, we would have briefed the men, prepared medical support, had chaplains ready, had documentation protocols established. They wouldn't have walked in blind. But we'd be 12 days later. Yes, 12 days. How many people died in 12 days, Reginald? I don't know. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Intelligence estimates 10% mortality per month in those camps. So maybe 300, maybe 500, maybe more. And if we'd followed your complete timeline for the entire campaign, how much later would we have arrived at Ordruff? Another pause. Longer this time. The sound of calculations. Maps consulted. Timelines reviewed. 6 weeks, perhaps 8. My planning called for methodical advance, consolidation, secure supply lines, perhaps 2 months total to reach this position. 2 months, thousands more dead, maybe tens of thousands across all the camps. Ashford's voice tight. Or perhaps fewer, because we'd have been prepared, because we'd have known what we were facing, because soldiers wouldn't need to carry trauma from stumbling unprepared into hell, because proper intelligence would have let us prioritize liberating camps instead of chasing tactical objectives. And there it was, the impossible calculus, the equation with no solution, the trolley problem written in blood and ash and the smoke from crematoria. Speed saves lives by arriving sooner. But preparation saves lives by arriving ready. Which matters more? How do you choose? How do you balance one against the other? How do you live with knowing your choice meant death either way? Pemberton had no answer. Neither did Ashford. No one did. That was the burden of command, making choices that killed people and living with not knowing if different choices would have killed fewer. Reginald, I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because you were right about something important. Merrick's speed had costs. Real costs. His men weren't prepared for what they found. That's on me. I chose speed over preparation. I prioritized momentum over coordination. I own that decision and its consequences. What do you want from me, Mr. Secretary? I want you to talk to him. To Merrick. He's taking this hard. Blames himself for not being faster. Thinks those 12 days are his fault. Thinks if he'd been even more aggressive, even more reckless, even more willing to ignore protocol, more people would be alive. Silence. Long silence. Finally, Ashford, they are his fault. Partially. Just as they're partially mine for being too slow. And partially yours for having to choose between them. And partially every German who knew and said nothing. And partially everyone who could have stopped this before it started. We're all guilty then. Yes, we are. That's what command means. Every decision carries weight. Every choice has consequences. Every action and inaction echoes. The question isn't whether we're guilty. We are. The question is whether we can live with it. Can you? Ashford was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more human, less iron and more flesh. I don't know yet. Ask me when the war is over. Ask me in 20 years when I've had time to understand what we did and what we didn't do, and whether any of it mattered the way we thought it would. The line went dead. Pemberton sat alone, holding the phone, thinking about 3 men who'd fought the same war with different methods, who'd both been right and both been wrong, who'd all carried different guilt for different choices. April 15th, 1945, 11 days after Ordruff, the directive came from Pemberton himself. Handwritten, personal, not a suggestion, an order. To Lieutenant General Reginald Ashford, 1st Army, to Major General Declan Merrick, 3rd Army. Gentlemen, your presence is requested at Supreme Headquarters Frankfurt for coordination meeting. Tomorrow, 1400 hours. Attendance mandatory. Come alone. No staff officers, no aides, no witnesses. Just 3 men and a conversation that couldn't happen with anyone else present. They arrived within minutes of each other. Ashford first, punctual as always, 55 years old. Still impeccable, still controlled, but something had changed in his face. Something softened, or perhaps broken, hard to tell. Merrick second, exactly on time. 48 years old, plain fatigues, no theater, no performance, just exhaustion, just weight visible in shoulders that hadn't been bent before Ordruff. They didn't look at each other immediately, didn't acknowledge each other. Two men who'd fought parallel wars and couldn't reconcile the difference. Pemberton stood at the head of the conference table, 70 years old, looking older. The war had aged all of them, but Pemberton most visibly. 4 years of impossible decisions visible in every line of his face. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Please sit." They sat, still not looking at each other, still maintaining professional distance. Pemberton remained standing. "I've spent the last week reviewing after-action reports, casualty figures, liberation statistics, strategic assessments, trying to understand what we accomplished and what it cost." Neither man responded, just waited. "General Ashford, First Army advanced 83 miles in 6 weeks following the Rhine crossing. You liberated 3 concentration camps. Your casualty rate was 62% lower than projections. Your supply lines never faltered. Your coordination was flawless. You achieved every objective according to plan with minimal loss of American life." Ashford nodded once. Sharp, professional, but no satisfaction, no pride, just acknowledgement. "General Merrick, Third Army advanced 212 miles in the same period. You liberated 12 concentration camps. Your casualty rate was 40% higher than First Army's. Your supply lines were constantly strained to breaking. Your coordination was improvised at best, but you achieved objectives no one thought possible and arrived at those camps weeks before anyone else could have." Merrick said nothing, just looked at his hands, at something invisible, at calculations that had no answer. "So which of you was right?" The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy, dense with implications and unspoken truths and questions that couldn't be answered. Pemberton continued. "Ashford's methods saved American lives through careful planning, minimized casualties, maintained supply lines, preserved combat effectiveness. That matters. That's professional. That's everything military doctrine says is right." He paused. "Merrick's methods saved civilian lives by arriving faster. Liberated camps weeks earlier, freed thousands of prisoners who would have died waiting for perfect preparation. That matters. That's urgent. That's everything moral imperative says is necessary." Another pause. Longer. "You were both right. You were both wrong. And I needed you both." Ashford spoke first. Voice controlled, but with emotion underneath. "Mr. Secretary, with respect, that's a politician's answer. It doesn't help us understand how to fight future wars. It doesn't provide guidance for doctrine. It doesn't tell junior officers which method to follow. No, it doesn't, because there's no single answer, no perfect doctrine, no method that's right for every situation. The war we fought in 1905 won't be the war we fight in 1905 or 1975. Doctrine must evolve. Technology will change. What worked yesterday might fail tomorrow." Merrick finally looked up, eyes haunted. "Then what's the lesson? What do we tell the next generation of officers? How do we pass on what we learn?" Pemberton sat down, finally joining them at the table. "Creating equality, creating intimacy. Tell them this war is tension between competing goods, speed versus preparation, initiative versus coordination, individual brilliance versus institutional discipline, audacity versus caution, results versus protocol. The art of command is knowing which value matters most in each specific moment." He looked directly at Ashford. "Reginald, your caution saved lives. Don't ever apologize for that. Don't ever let anyone tell you that planning is cowardice or that preparation is weakness. Your methods prevented disasters. Your discipline maintained effectiveness. Your professionalism set standards that will last generations." Then to Merrick. "Declan, your speed saved lives. Don't let guilt over Ordruff make you forget the 12 camps you liberated. The thousands of prisoners you freed weeks before anyone else could have reached them. The people who are alive today because you moved when others waited." Both men silent, processing, beginning to understand something they'd been too close to see. "But here's the hard truth." Pemberton's voice quiet now. Personal. "You need each other. Ashford's discipline, without Merrick's audacity, becomes paralysis. Merrick's speed without Ashford's planning becomes chaos. The tension between you isn't dysfunction. It's the dynamic that drives excellence. It's the balance that produces victory without unacceptable cost." Ashford and Merrick looked at each other, really looked, for the first time since the Rhine crossing, seeing not rivals but reflections, not competitors but complements, different sides of the same essential question. How do you win wars carefully or quickly, professionally or audaciously? By the book or by instinct? The answer was yes. All of it. Both. Always. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, charged with emotion neither man wanted to show, but both felt. Finally, Ashford spoke, voice tight, formal, but honest. Declan, your men at Ordruff. I heard what they saw, what they had to process without preparation. I'm, I'm sorry they weren't ready. Sorry they didn't have the support they needed. Merrick's jaw clenched, emotion barely controlled. Reginald, your men crossed the Rhine the next day, with medical support, with psychological preparation, with documentation protocols, with everything mine didn't have. That, that mattered. That saved your soldiers from carrying what mine will carry forever. Silence again. Heavier. Both men circling toward understanding they'd resisted. Toward truth neither wanted to admit they weren't competitors. They were partners, complementary, necessary to each other. Ashford continued, voice softer. You saved 12 days. How many people are alive today because of those 12 days? Hundreds, thousands. We'll never know. But they're alive, because you moved when I would have waited. But how many of my men will wake up screaming for the rest of their lives because they weren't prepared for what they found? How many will drink themselves to death trying to forget? How many marriages will fail? How many will eat a bullet in 10 years because the memories won't stop? I don't know, but I know that if we'd followed my timeline, even more people would have died in those camps. So maybe the cost your men are paying saved even more lives than we can calculate. Merrick looked at him, really looked, seeing for the first time not obstruction, but different wisdom, not weakness, but different strength. I was wrong about you. Speed isn't everything. Ashford's face worked, emotion breaking through iron control. I was wrong about you. Caution isn't always wisdom. Sometimes waiting is just fear disguised as professionalism. Neither man moved for a long moment. Then Merrick extended his hand across the table. Ashford looked at it, at the offer, at the bridge being built, at the possibility of something other than competition and resentment. He took it. The handshake lasted longer than protocol required, longer than formality demanded. Two men who'd fought different wars finally understanding they'd fought the same one. That their methods didn't contradict, they complemented. That tension between them wasn't dysfunction. It was precisely what excellence required. Pemberton watched them, felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, vindication, hope. Maybe the choice hadn't destroyed them. Maybe it had forged them into something stronger, something better, something that would survive into peace and define how America fought future wars. May 8, 1945, VE Day, victory in Europe. Germany surrendered, unconditionally, totally. The Third Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years collapsed after 12. American forces occupied positions from the Rhine to the Elbe, hundreds of miles of German territory. Cities liberated, concentration camps freed, millions of people saved. The Wehrmacht destroyed, the Nazi regime ended. The final statistics told a story. Multiple stories, depending on which numbers you chose to emphasize. Third Army under Merrick, 212 miles advanced in 6 weeks, 12 concentration camps liberated, 60,000 prisoners freed, German resistance shattered by speed and audacity. First Army under Ashford, 83 miles advanced according to plan, 3 concentration camps liberated, every objective secured, supply lines maintained, coordination flawless, American casualties 60% below projections. Both armies achieved their objectives. Both contributed to victory. Both methods proved effective, different, complementary, necessary. But the strategic picture told another story, a darker story, a story about what hadn't been achieved despite all the tactical success. Soviet forces occupied Berlin, Prague, Vienna, half of Germany, all of Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, half of Europe. The race to Berlin had been won by Stalin. Not because Soviet forces were faster than American, but because American and British forces had stopped at the Elbe, stopped by agreement, stopped by coordination, stopped by political considerations and alliance management. Merrick had wanted to keep going, push to Berlin, take the capital before the Soviets arrived, continue the momentum, exploit the speed. Ashford had argued against it, extended supply lines, coordination with Soviets per Yalta agreements, political complications, risk of friendly fire incidents. all the reasonable professional objections. Pemberton had sided with Ashford, had chosen coordination over momentum, had prioritized alliance management over strategic position. Now looking at the map of occupied Europe, he wondered if they'd moved faster from the beginning, if they'd embraced Merrick's tempo across the entire campaign, if speed had been prioritized over coordination from Normandy forward. Would Berlin be in American hands? Would Eastern Europe be free? Would the post-war world look different? Would millions of people live under democracy instead of Soviet occupation? No way to know. No way to test the hypothesis. History only runs once. No do-overs. No alternate timelines. Just choices made and consequences lived with and questions that would never be answered. But the question lingered. Would linger for decades. For historians, for strategists, for anyone who studied this moment and wondered if different choices would have produced different outcomes. Pemberton stood in his office in Frankfurt, temporary headquarters, maps on the walls showing final positions. American forces, British forces, Soviet forces, the new reality of post-war Europe, the Iron Curtain already descending even though Churchill hadn't named it yet. Dr. Whitfield entered, had been checking on him daily, worried about his friend, about the weight he carried, about the toll 4 years had taken. Aldrich, you look exhausted. I am exhausted, Marcus, exhausted and confused and uncertain about everything I thought I knew. The war is over. You won. You should be celebrating. Pemberton laughed, bitter, hollow. Did we win? Look at that map. Half of Europe is under Soviet control. The Iron Curtain is falling. We defeated one totalitarian regime only to watch another fill the vacuum. Millions of people traded Nazi occupation for Soviet occupation. How was that victory? Whitfield poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle on Pemberton's desk, handed one over. You can't blame yourself for Stalin. Can I? I made decisions that affected timing. I chose Ashford's caution over Merrick's speed initially. I prioritized coordination over momentum. I stopped at the elbow when Merrick wanted to push to Berlin, and now millions of people will live under Soviet occupation because of choices I made. Or millions more would have died if you'd chosen differently. You don't know. Can't know. That's the impossible burden of command. Pemberton took the whiskey, drank, let the burn distract from thoughts that wouldn't stop. I've spent 4 years managing this coalition, balancing competing interests, trying to keep everyone happy, trying to maintain protocol and discipline and order, trying to do everything professionally and correctly. That's your job. Is it or is my job to win wars, not to win them cleanly or properly or by the rules, just to win them, fast, decisively, before the enemy can adapt or the political situation can deteriorate or the window for shaping the future closes? Whitfield sat down, studied his friend, concerned by what he was hearing. You sound like Merrick. Maybe Merrick was right all along. Maybe speed is the only thing that really matters. Maybe I should have unleashed him completely from the beginning. Let him race to Berlin. Let him take risks and break protocols and move so fast the Soviets couldn't keep up. Maybe that was the right choice, and I was too cautious to make it. Or maybe his speed would have gotten thousands of Americans killed. Maybe extending supply lines that far would have created disaster. Maybe friendly fire with the Soviets would have started World War III. You don't know. That's exactly the problem, Marcus. I don't know, we'll never know. Have to live with not knowing if my choices were right or if different choices would have been better. Whitfield refilled both glasses. What happened with Ashford? Are you two? He'll never forgive me. Our relationship is destroyed. Oh, we're professional. He follows orders, takes direction, executes brilliantly. But we're not what we were. He looks at me and sees betrayal, sees his life's work turned into footnote, sees everything he believed invalidated by my choice. And Merrick, Pemberton's face darkened. Merrick is eating himself alive over Ohrdruf, over every camp we liberated. Keeps calculating how many more people would be alive if he'd been faster, if he'd crossed in February instead of March, if he'd moved even more recklessly. The man who succeeded brilliantly thinks he failed because he wasn't fast enough. So both of them are miserable, and you're caught in the middle. Both of them are right, Marcus. That's the hell of it. Ashford was right that preparation matters. That speed without intelligence creates trauma and missed opportunities and soldiers who will carry scars forever. And Merrick was right that speed saves lives, that waiting kills people while we plan. that sometimes you have to accept costs to achieve speed that matters. So what's the answer? Pemberton stared at his whiskey, at the amber liquid that wouldn't provide answers no matter how much he drank. There isn't one. There's no perfect balance, no optimal solution, no choice that doesn't kill people. Leadership is choosing which price you're willing to pay and living with not knowing if a different price would have been lower. That's bleak. That's honest. I chose speed over preparation when Merrick crossed early. I chose coordination over speed when I stopped at the Elba. Both choices killed people. Different numbers. I'll never know which choice killed fewer. That's the weight I'll carry for the rest of my life. Whitfield said nothing. What was there to say? What comfort existed for impossible choices? Finally, what will you tell them, Ashford and Merrick? They're both waiting for your final verdict. Your judgment on who was right. Pemberton considered. I'll tell them the truth. They were both right. They were both wrong, and I needed them both. And every future war will need both kinds of leaders. And the art of command is knowing which approach each moment requires, and living with the consequences either way. That won't satisfy them. No, but it's true, and truth is all I have left to give. The final meeting happened 2 weeks later, May 23rd. Private, no staff, no witnesses, just 3 men in a room trying to understand what they'd done and what it meant and how to live with it. Ashford arrived first, punctual as always, 55 years old, something broken behind his eyes but professionalism maintained. Merrick arrived on time, 48 years old, weight visible in shoulders, age in face, 4 years of war and 12 days at Ordruff visible in every line. They nodded to each other, not warm but not hostile, something shifting, something different than the resentment that had defined their relationship since the Rhine crossing. Pemberton gestured to chairs. Gentlemen, please. This won't take long, but I wanted to speak with both of you before I return to Washington, before we all move on to whatever comes next. They sat, waited. I've spent weeks reviewing after-action reports, casualty figures, liberation statistics, strategic assessments, trying to understand what we accomplished and what it cost and whether any of it mattered the way we thought it would. He pulled out 2 folders, set them on the table. General Ashford, First Army achieved every objective. Your planning was flawless. Your execution was professional. Your casualty rate was the lowest in theater. You saved thousands of American lives through careful preparation. History will record your methods as exemplary professional military practice. Ashford nodded. No satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. General Merrick, Third Army advanced faster than anyone thought possible. You liberated 12 camps. You freed 60,000 prisoners. You shattered German resistance through sheer momentum. But you paid for that speed with higher casualties. With soldiers traumatized by horror they weren't prepared for. With supply lines stressed to breaking. History will record your methods as brilliant but costly. Merrick looked at his hands, said nothing. So which of you was right? Which method should define American military doctrine going forward? Which approach should we teach at West Point and VMI, in every military academy? Silence. Neither man wanted to answer. Both knew any answer would be incomplete. Pemberton leaned forward. You were both right. You were both wrong. And that's not political evasion. That's the truth about war, about leadership, about impossible choices that don't have right answers. He looked at Ashford. Reginald, your caution saved American lives. Your planning prevented disasters. Your discipline maintained effectiveness. Don't ever apologize for that. Don't ever let anyone tell you that professionalism is weakness or that planning is cowardice. Your methods matter. They'll always matter. Then to Merrick. Declan, your speed saved civilian lives. Your audacity freed camps weeks early. Your willingness to accept risk and achieve results that careful planning couldn't match. Don't let guilt over costs make you forget the victories. Don't let Ordruff overshadow the 12 camps you liberated, the thousands you saved. Both men silent, but listening, really listening. But here's what I need you both to understand. Pemberton's voice quiet now, personal, almost pleading. You need each other. Future wars will need both of you, both approaches, both methods. The tension between speed and caution isn't dysfunction. It's the creative friction that produces victory without unacceptable cost. He paused, let the words land. Ashford's discipline without Merrick's audacity becomes paralysis, becomes preparation that never leads to action, becomes planning that loses wars while achieving perfect coordination. Merrick's speed without Ashford's planning becomes chaos, becomes momentum that collapses supply lines, becomes audacity that wins battles but loses campaigns. You need each other. We need both of you. Every army needs both kinds of leaders, both kinds of thinking, both kinds of command. Ashford and Merrick looked at each other, understanding beginning to dawn, resentment beginning to fade, recognition beginning to emerge. They weren't enemies. They were partners, complementary, two sides of the same coin, neither complete without the other. After Pemberton finished speaking, silence filled the room, heavy but not uncomfortable, reflective rather than tense. Finally, Merrick spoke. I received a letter yesterday from a woman in Poland. Her husband was in Ordruf. I liberated him. He's alive because we arrived when we did. She wanted to thank me. His voice cracked slightly. I keep thinking, what about all the people we didn't liberate? All the people who died in camps? We reached too late or didn't reach at all. How do I reconcile the gratitude from people we saved with the guilt about people we didn't? Ashford was quiet for a moment. Then, I received letters too, from families of soldiers, thanking me for bringing their sons and husbands home alive, for planning carefully, for not gambling with their lives. Another pause. I keep thinking, what about all the people in camps who died while I planned, while I coordinated, while I prepared perfectly? How do I reconcile the gratitude from families whose soldiers survived with the guilt about civilians who didn't? They looked at each other, understanding, passing between them. Mirror images, same guilt, different sources, both impossible to resolve. Pemberton spoke softly. You can't reconcile it. That's the burden of command. You make choices that save some people and doom others. You'll never know if different choices would have saved more or fewer. You'll carry both the gratitude and the guilt for the rest of your lives. That's not comfort, Merrick said. No, it's not. But it's truth, and sometimes truth is all we have. Ashford leaned back, face thoughtful. So what now? How do we move forward? How do we take what we learned and make it useful for whoever fights the next war? Pemberton pulled out a document. I've been thinking about that, about how to preserve what you both taught me, about doctrine for the post-war military. He slid it across the table. Both generals leaned forward to read. Proposed Joint Manual on Combined Arms Operations, Operational Tempo, Integration of Speed and Discipline, co-authored by Lieutenant General Reginald Ashford and Major General Declan Merrick. They looked up, surprised, skeptical. You want us to write doctrine together? Ashford's tone doubtful. I want you to teach together what you learned separately. I want future officers to understand that there's no single right method, that different situations require different approaches, that excellence comes from understanding when to plan and when to act, when to coordinate and when to exploit, when to be Ashford and when to be Merrick. Merrick shook his head. We'll disagree on everything. Probably that's the point. Let officers see the tension. Let them understand that brilliant commanders disagree, that doctrine isn't dogma, that the art of command is judgment about which approach each moment requires. Ashford looked at Merrick. What do you think? Merrick considered. I think I'll learn things from you I don't want to admit I need to learn. I think I'll learn things from you that scare me. Is that a yes? That's a yes. They both looked at Pemberton. We'll try. No promises it'll work. We'll probably fight constantly. Probably, Pemberton agreed. But that tension, that creative friction, that's exactly what the next generation needs to see. Not false harmony, not artificial consensus. Real disagreement between brilliant minds wrestling with impossible questions. Pemberton sat in his study in Washington, 71 years old now, retired, war over, service complete. Just an old man writing memoirs nobody would probably read, but that he felt compelled to record anyway. He wrote, General Merrick's crossing at Oppenheim demonstrated that modern warfare rewards speed over preparation. Lieutenant General Ashford's Operation Thunderclap demonstrated that careful planning saves American lives. The contrast between these approaches was instructive. For those of us who championed institutional methods, it was uncomfortable. For those who valued audacity over caution, it was vindicating. For those trying to understand the truth, it was revealing. We need both. He paused, considered crossing it out. Too honest. Too revealing of his own uncertainty. He left it, then added in the margin a note he knew would never make the published version. In war, you choose between generals who make you proud and generals who win faster. I chose speed. I chose results. I chose to admit that doctrine I defended my entire career had been surpassed by reality. That choice may have been right or wrong, I'll never know. That's the burden of command. Living with permanent uncertainty about whether your decisions saved lives or cost them. He closed the journal, poured himself a whiskey, sat in silence. The phone rang, unexpected at this hour. Aldrich, it's Harrison Caldwell. Harrison, it's late. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's very right. I wanted you to hear this immediately. Declan Merrick and Reginald Ashford have agreed to co-author the new field manual on combined arms operations. Together, as you suggested. They're calling it Operational Tempo Integration of Speed and Discipline. Pemberton felt something loosen in his chest, relief, vindication, hope he hadn't felt in months. They're working together. Not easily, apparently. My sources say the meetings are spirited, lots of disagreement, lots of heated debate. But yes, they've realized what you knew all along. They need each other. Their methods complement. Their tension creates something neither could achieve alone. That's good news, Harrison. Maybe the best news I've heard since VE Day. There's more. They want to dedicate the manual to you, to the man who had to choose between them and chose to value both. Pemberton felt tears threaten, pushed them back. Not yet. Not while anyone could hear. Tell them I'm honored. Tell them what they're doing, teaching future officers that there's no single right way. That's the most important legacy any of us will leave. After the call ended, Pemberton sat in the dark, thinking about three men who'd fought the same war with different methods, who'd believed different things, who'd each been right and wrong in ways that would take decades to fully understand. The lesson wasn't about speed or caution, wasn't about Merrick or Ashford, wasn't even about his impossible choice. The lesson was simpler and harder. Sometimes the people who frustrate you most are the ones you need most. The tension between competing values isn't a problem to solve. It's the friction that generates excellence, the creative conflict that produces results neither side could achieve alone. You don't choose between them. You learn from both. You value the tension. You embrace the disagreement. You understand that wisdom comes not from having answers, but from wrestling with questions that don't have answers. And if you're lucky, if you're wise, you tell them what they mean to you before it's too late, before time runs out, before history moves on and moments are lost forever. Pemberton raised his glass to the empty room, to two generals who taught him that leadership isn't about having answers. It's about asking better questions, about living with uncertainty, about choosing between impossible options and making peace with permanent doubt about whether you chose correctly. To the commanders who made him choose, and to the choice that defined him. Speed or discipline, results or protocol, the future or the past. In the end, he'd chosen all of them. Because wars aren't won by picking sides. They're won by understanding that both sides are necessary. That tension is strength. That disagreement produces wisdom. And living with the consequences of that truth. Understanding that you'll never know if you chose correctly. That certainty is impossible. That command means living with permanent questions about roads not taken and choices not made and people saved or lost by decisions you can never undo. That's the burden, that's the weight, that's the price of choosing. And it's a price worth paying. Because the alternative, refusing to choose, avoiding responsibility, letting someone else make impossible decisions, that's worse. Better to choose and doubt than to avoid and blame. Better to act and question than to hesitate and regret. Better to carry the weight of command than to pass it to someone else and pretend you're innocent. Pemberton finished his whiskey, sat in darkness, made peace with permanent uncertainty, and knew that somewhere two brilliant generals were arguing about doctrine, disagreeing about methods, fighting about approaches, and learning from each other, growing together, creating something neither could build alone. That was victory. That was legacy. That was the best any of them could hope for. Not certainty, not vindication, not even being right. Just the possibility that their struggle, their tension, their creative friction would help the next generation avoid some mistakes while inevitably making others. That was enough. It had to be enough. Because it was all anyone ever got.